Last time, I was still optimizing the dungeon rendering code for The Dungeon Under My House, my second freshly squeezed entertainment project. If you've been following along, you know that The Dungeon Under My House will be a non-violent, first-person dungeon crawler, and as a freshly squeezed entertainment project, it will be a polished, playable prototype that provides a complete entertainment experience. It will be freely available for desktop computers, as well as mobile devices, with no ads, no in-app purchases, and no personal data tracking. Hello and welcome. My name is Gianfranco Berardi, my pronouns are he, him, his, and I encourage curiosity and support creativity through my solo indie game development studio, GB Games LLC. I'm really happy that you're here to join me in this indie game development journey. In this week's Freshly Squeezed Progress Report, you can see the link in the companion blog post in the description, I finished working on dungeon rendering optimization, finally, and then started the work of replacing my test dungeon with the first real areas of the dungeon. If you remember from my previous reports, I had two main bottlenecks to my raycasting code, rendering the ceilings and rendering the floors. Together they were doing calculations for over 500,000 pixels and it was slow. Since the two functions had such similar code, I made isolated changes to the draw ceilings function as much as I could so I can compare results in a profiler to see if I was making actual improvements and by how much. And sometimes I was surprised by how little or how much an impact any one change could make. Well, my plan this past week was to simply finish the optimization work by copying the changes that I made in Draw Ceilings to the Draw Floors code. But I found a few more simple optimizations that definitely help. Looking at the bottlenecks, they had their own bottleneck in the form of calculating new colors for pixels based on the lighting of the grid cell. I realized that much of the calculation can be done when pre-processing the lighting in the first place, completely eliminating them from the 500,000 pixel loop. I still haven't hit 60 frames per second, but I am impressed that I keep finding new ways to optimize the code. Still, it was time to move on. My main goal was to add some gameplay relevant to the intro sequence. I envisioned the player descending down the ladder they found in their basement and entering into the dungeon for the first time, staring down a long dark hallway. And then the party members would be too scared to go into the pitch black darkness, which would require the player to return to the house. But first I needed that dark hallway. Until now, in order to create the dungeon level layouts, I had to define each grid cell in code. My test dungeon is roughly 30 grid cells, each defining their walls, ceiling, floor, doors, and portals such as the ladder that takes you back into the house. So I created some helper functions to define an arbitrarily sized room as well as create an arbitrarily sized column, which is like an inside-out room where the walls are defined in adjacent cells to enclose a space. To create the test dungeon, which features two rooms connected by a hallway, some doors, and a 1x1 column in the biggest room, I went from over 30 function calls to about 7, significantly easier for me to work with. Then I got rid of the test dungeon and quickly created the long dark hallway. I updated the lighting code so that the lighting blends more smoothly, and I updated the dirt texture so that it tiles together better, although I think the lighting gradations still make it look like an obvious change between cells. I'm quite happy with how much better it looks though. So what happens when you try to enter the darkness now? Nothing at the moment. Most of my time was spent making it easier for me to create that dungeon layout. Ideally, it would be even easier to work with a GUI that lets me essentially carve out the dungeon on a 2D grid. This new functionality might be helpful if I create my own map editor, but I think it makes more sense to make use of something like tiled, which I had looked at briefly in the past. I expect that now that I have my long dark hallway though, I can start adding functionality to prevent the player from proceeding if it gets too dark, like I wanted to, and then I can create the means of overcoming that obstacle. Thanks for watching. Stay curious. Now, if you want to learn when I release the Dungeon Under My House, or about future freshly squeezed entertainment games I'm creating, then sign up for the GB Games Curiosities newsletter and download full-color player's guides to my existing and future games for free. Again, check the links in the description.